both sides as well.
Yeah, well,
good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Councillor Eileen Taylor, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on the Leeds City Council YouTube channel, so that the public can observe the meetings without being present. South and West Plan panels deal with applications from the south, northwest, and west of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public, and council officers to help members of the panel make their decisions. Could I now invite all members to introduce themselves? After you speak, could you please mute your mic? Could I start on my left?
good afternoon, Chair. Michael Doherty, Principal Planning Officer and Case Officer for the application, South and West team.
Good afternoon, I'm John Booth, Principal Engineer Highways.
Good afternoon, Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Moortown Meanwood Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Jim McKenna, Armley Ward.
Afternoon, Councillor John Garvani, Horsforth Ward.
Good afternoon, Jordan Bowden, Roundhay Ward.
Good afternoon, Daniel Limouth, part of the Plans Panel team.
Afternoon, everyone. Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Trish Smith, Pudsey Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Hi, everyone. Natasha Prosser, Clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Philip Plumtree Valley, Principal Legal Officer and Legal Advisor to the panel this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Steve Butler, Group Manager for South and West and Lead Officer for South and West Plans Panel.
Thank you, Hall. Could I welcome Councillor McKenna to our panel? Councillor Walsher is not more on the panel, so Councillor McKenna has replaced Councillor Walsher. Also, could I thank all the public who is in the public chamber today for attending. Please, I know it's not something, but please do enjoy your day with us and see how we go. You are more than welcome. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know who's turning it up. It can't turn up. Well, I can't turn it up. Sorry.
Sorry, I think the issue is that Councillor Taylor does actually have a bit of a cold, so she's struggling with her voice full stop. But you should hear everybody else. Sorry.
Is this any better? Yes. Thank you.
I think Councillor Hesselwood will be on her way. I text her because I had mechanical issues with my bike, so that's why I was a little bit late, but I think she should be on her way. Yeah.
All right, so do we move on to agenda of the previous meeting? Should we go page by page?
Chair, it's actually appeals against refusal of inspection of documents.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Yeah.
I'll run through the agenda items, Chair.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So agenda item 1, there's no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there's no items which require the exclusion of the press and the public today. Agenda item 3, I'm not aware of any late formal items of business. Agenda item 4, do members have any interest? No. Agenda item 5, apologies from Councillors Reagan and Finnegan today, Chair.
Sorry, I'm struggling today. Sorry. So should we now move to item 6? That's the minutes of the previous meeting. Should we go page by page? We start on page 9. 10. 11. 12. 13. Does everybody agree with the minutes? Someone wants to move the minutes? Any comment? Second? Thank you. And I move on to item 7, former Airedale Mills, Max Bridge, Town Street, Rodley. Could I ask the officers to present the application?
Thank you, Chair. The application under consideration is a reserved matter scheme seeking to establish matters relating to layout, scale, appearance and landscaping only, pursuant to previous outline consent. Sorry, just get the appropriate slide up. This first slide shows the site itself with access taken via Mossbridge Road from Town Street. The site comprises a triangular piece of land, formerly Mossbridge Works, and it's an allocated housing site within the site allocations plan. The principle of development has been accepted via the previously approved outline consent, which established a principle of residential development of up to 69 dwellings, plus the vehicular access, with all further matters reserved. The canal and towpath, as you'll see on this slide, run to the southwestern side of the site, and with various residential developments abutting the canal further to the north. The next slide is just an aerial view again, just to highlight the site itself. Rodley Nature Reserve is located to the eastern section, which you'll see there. It's accessed via the new swing bridge through gated access adjacent to the development site itself, with an access road running down to the bridge over the River Aire to the north of the application site. Also, Rodley Cricket Club is located to the north of the application site, served by the current bridge, and with a cricket pitch and clubhouse above, which you can see there. This slide just gives an indication of the outline approved access arrangements. The area in yellow is Mossbridge Road, and that'll be adopted up to the swing bridge itself, with a new footpath provided to one side. The swing bridge itself is not to be adopted or maintained by the council, with maintenance arrangement and management responsibility over to the applicant and the developer of the site. The access into the development itself and the internal highway is to be built to adopt all standards. The principle of the access and, like I said, the arrangements were approved as part of the previous outline consent, along with the principle and provision of a replacement swing bridge. Just to give you some further context, these are recent pictures of the described access arrangements. As you'll see on the left, Mossbridge Road is currently being completed and allows two-way vehicle passing on there. The central picture shows the new swing bridge in situ. That's in the closed position, allowing vehicle access to and from the development site. The picture on the right just gives some further context to the bridge itself, along with a towpath to the side of that, obviously, which remains open for pedestrians, cyclists, etc. Further to those, just context the development site itself on the left there. Picture shows access down into the site where the adopted road will be installed, along with general change in levels sloping down towards the development. The central picture shows the towpath back towards Leeds city centre, and you'll note the existing mature trees in that photo, which are a feature of that boundary side of the development, outside the existing stone retaining wall. The existing stone wall's in a state of disrepair, running down the boundary side of that boundary of the development, features gaps and is to be sort of basically renewed via a new boundary treatment through the development itself. The development seeks to retain these trees along the towpath boundary with the installation of a new 3-metre wide ecology buffer, providing separation between the towpath and the Leeds and Liverpool Canal. The picture on the right shows the access back down into Rodley Nature Reserve towards the towpath and the bridge over the sort of back down towards the River Aire, where we did obviously conduct the site visit this morning for the members. And just a final set of photos to give the context. So this is down in towards the nature reserve itself and the bridge over the River Aire. The picture on the central photo shows the river itself, which you'll note various mature trees along the right-hand side. And this area towards the side of the river itself is to remain as an ecology buffer, providing an 8-metre separation between the development and the River Aire. And obviously the trees in that section of the development are to be retained. So turning to the development itself, this slide shows the proposed site plan. You'll note the mix of properties, which includes detached, semi-detached and terrace properties, along with a 4-storey apartment block to the southern area of the development. The accommodation is split between a schedule of 51 dwellings of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom units, along with 16 apartments within the block itself. Again, they're split between 1 and 2 bedroom units, totaling 67 dwellings. The site itself is previously mentioned ecology buffers which run around its perimeter. Notably to the eastern boundary, again, where I just mentioned, a 3-metre buffer will be installed along the towpath, and with the 8-metre buffer to the eastern side along the river. The development's been amended via negotiations with the applicant and the consultees, including nature officers, engagement with ward members and Rodley Nature Reserve and the cricket club, in an attempt to address some concerns around ecology matters. The buffers indicated are now considered to provide sufficient separation from the development, and these include weld mesh fencing and appropriate boundary treatments, including specialist measures for cat protection to prevent predation within the nature reserve. The plan also indicates the existing trees to be retained, again, as previously mentioned, the ones along the towpath and within the ecology buffer itself. You'll note the linear row of dwellings to the east of the development. These consist of 3- and 4-storey townhouse type properties, and they're orientated to face the internal road within the development, with gardens to the rear towards the towpath. There's a change in levels in this area, with the townhouse type dwellings proposed. The change in levels is around 2 to 3 metres. The central area of dwellings, which you can see on the slide there, are the typical 2-storey properties. This is with the exception of a larger M43 accessible bungalow to the north of the development to comply with accessibility policy. The southern portion of the site features the proposed apartment block, which you can see there down at the bottom, with its parking and obviously an open area of green space to the rear of the apartment block itself. There are 10 affordable units proposed, consisting of a mixture of housing types, including 3 apartments, and the scheme is considered to provide a policy compliant amount of affordable housing. An additional green space contribution of 25,000 is to be obtained, given a shortfall in on-site delivery, along with the off-site contribution, given ecology concerns, and this is to be obtained by the outlined Section 106 agreement. And further to the previous plan, this slide highlights just the proposed boundary treatments and again the ecology buffers, just to make that clear to members. You'll see the 2.4 metre high weld mesh fence there in orange, which in essence runs around the perimeter of the site, again for ecology reasons, to protect the ecology buffers surrounding the site. The following slides just outline the housing types themselves, so just give you an idea of the appearance and the design of the housing. This is the detached type property with a pitched roof, the stone heads and sills, and obviously it'll be finished in a grey roof tile. These are the 4-storey townhouse type developments which run along the towpath side of the development. You'll note the change in levels, as previously mentioned there. The properties are to be erected in stone with an integral garage to the ground floor and Juliet balconies to the front. Again, just for clarity, these are the semi-detached properties, traditional design and appearance, stone heads and sills, and again to be erected in stone. And finally, just to provide an illustration of the accessible bungalow, obviously a larger property, but a bungalow with the internal arrangements to meet accessibility standards. And this slide obviously shows the 4-storey apartment block, replicating the Juliet balcony features on the dwellings themselves. Amendments have been made on the design of the apartment block in conjunction with design officers to increase window sizes and replicate the form of the surrounding properties. The apartment block itself has been relocated to the southern portion of the site away from the nature reserve. This was considered to reduce its visual impact upon the surrounding reserve. And just the final slide give you an indication of the actual street scenes. So you'll see there the semi-detached properties, detached dwellings, and both townhouse and 2-storey properties which are be proposed. So in essence, the application is recommended for approval based on the submitted plans, subject to the section 106 for to secure a off-site green space contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now just read out, in according to our protocol for public speaking at Plans panel, members of the public are in attendance to speak to the panel. After they have spoken, I will invite members of the panel to ask questions of the speakers to clarify matters of facts, and those questions should be limited to relevant planning issues. I will then invite officers to clarify any matters raised, to point out any consideration raised in the discussion, but which are not material to determine the applications. We have speakers on both sides. We have 4 speakers in objection to the application, and we have 1 speaking in favor. Could I call the 4th speaker, Keith, Councillor Carter, Jeremy, and Councillor Ritchie to the table, please? Thank you for coming today. As I stated, I've got 4 minutes to speak. However, today I allow extra time. So you've got 2 minutes each. That's in total of 8 minutes between you 4 to speak today. Thank you. Sorry.
You just want to ask who to start?
Sorry, who is starting?
Councillor Andrew Carter, ward member for Carving Farsley Ward, into which Rodley falls. You're well aware of my objections to the plan overall. I've sent numerous letters of objection and comment in over a long period of time. But I want to urge the panel today to take the opportunity of putting right the mistakes of the past, certainly the mistakes which are going to significantly impact upon residents of this scheme, if you pass it or pass the detail, and also the existing residents of Rodley. I particularly refer to problems which will be caused if the access bridge malfunctions. I realise you want to talk about the detail, but it's impossible to talk solely about the detail without commenting on the means of access to the development, which has so far proved to be inadequate. And indeed, if it malfunctions, will be dangerous to the new residents of this proposed development, could propose a severe risk. Traffic will back up, which will affect residents existing now in Rodley and I would ask you to seriously consider, if you're passing this, residents only parking in either permanently or temporarily over the construction period in the streets opposite. The site itself, I would ask you to look at the fact that the public open space seems inadequate. I personally don't believe that flats on that side of the canal bank are in keeping at all with the area. And I want to stress that it is the residents in my ward of Carvley and Farsley who will be most affected by this development and the issues if the access malfunctions. And you will hear today, I'm sure, from all the speakers, that the access conditions that you imposed have not been met. And I would suggest to you very strongly, therefore, that you need to ensure the safety and duty of care to existing and future residents, and make sure the access arrangements do in fact operate properly before you take a final decision. The people who live on this site will be literally on an island if the access fails, and so far there's every sign it will. Thank you, Chair.
Who's going next?
Okay, I'm Jerry Knapp. I'm speaking for Rodley Nature Reserve. We're committed to maintain the diversity of wildlife on the site and make it available for the enjoyment and education of the public. We haven't opposed this development, but we've worked through the planning process to limit damage to wildlife and to the reserve. The ecology buffer around the development is crucial to this. We oppose the construction of a pipeline across the ecology buffer to discharge surface water to the river, which is contrary to the original planning permission. This risks damage to the ecology buffer and to the wildlife. Can I explain more about that if required? Our only water supply is directly opposite the development site, and contamination of this water supply would be absolutely disastrous to the reserve. So we think, I can explain the details of why that is later. We think there should be no discharge of surface water into this area. The submitted plans don't give an exact location for the pipeline or the outfall, which is unreasonable. And we think if the location is not defined exactly, planning permission should not be granted. If it is granted, we demand an input into the location and the design of the outfall, which will impact on the wildlife of the reserve. We're concerned about the risk of damage to the ecology buffer during the construction process, and we request that the ecology buffer area is securely fenced prior to any construction work. And this needs to be written into the final planning permission to make sure that ecology buffer and the wildlife is safe. We're concerned about site management and disturbance during a lengthy construction period, and to protect the reserve and the wildlife corridor along the river, we think the nature reserve should be involved in pre-construction plans, and this should be written into the planning permission, final planning permission. We'd also request that, in deference to the wildlife and the visitors, there should be no work on the site during Saturdays and Sundays.
So far, 2 speakers spoken, and we are discussing and debating the housing issue, but so far there isn't a comment regarding the house. So I don't know if the other 2 speakers are going to comment on the house or any other issue, but today really we are here to discuss the housing. As Councillor Carter quite right, we cannot discuss it without mentioning the bridge, but there's a limited amount of time should be given to the bridge because we are here to discuss housing.
Thank you. Good afternoon, panel, and I agree with the comments made earlier, but I'm not going to repeat those. So green space, the on-site usable communal green space is wholly inadequate. While welcoming the hybrid approach, the offer of 25k is not enough to make the necessary enhancements to the local park which a significant increase in families would need that this development brings. It'd also benefit the wider Rodley community to negate some of the negative matters this proposed development has brought and residents have endured. In the highways report, point 33, references outline satisfying officers. However, this analysis is seriously flawed, in my opinion. It was done in December, so it doesn't take into account the summer weekends when cricket is on, the reserve is open and canal traffic is busier. And bear in mind, the previous bridge took 3 minutes to operate. This one will be 8 minutes if they manage to resolve the current problems. And should it fail, the situation will be untenable. And Keith is going to talk a bit more about that. In terms of parking, we've lost 10 spaces on Mossbridge Road. I think they're described as informal parking spaces. Well, let me tell you from my experience, who's a regular visitor down there, they're used throughout the summer for people on the leisure activities, canal, etc. They were always filled. So we're going to lose also the capacity on Town Street with the proposed TRO. So this is going to create problems for the local community as people seek alternative options for those leisure activities. Local streets such as Longfield Drive, the Cricket Club car park, the Nature Reserve car park, and the new development will be likely alternatives. So it'll cause massive inconvenience to many. The solution is to reduce the proposed number of units on the development to provide visitor parking on the new development. And bear in mind that the policy is slightly below for the flats to start with as well. And most people have more than 2 cars. Admittedly, the policy is 2 per unit. However, I think we can do better. Happy to answer any questions or develop any of those matters.
My name is Keith Lambert. I'm a retired design and production engineer from Rodley who has knowledge of heavy rotating structures. This bridge is not fit for purpose, and this should not be signed off in this condition. Poor archaic design, poor manufacture, installation and assembly not good, mainly due to the latter. Too many parts that could fail. A mechanical device can fail, and there are lots on this bridge. Rack and pinion is very poor design, open to elements and abuse, and this is the main operating feature. Pinion not engaged right due to manufacturing and design faults. This will cause premature wear, interference, which could mean that the bridge would jam. Wedges need to engage correctly, which is hard on such a large structure. And when the bridge stops, bounce back will occur, and then the wedges will not be in line. One aspect which is happening now. Failure will not allow the barriers to rise, and they have introduced electric power for the limit switches and the barriers. But if there's a power failure, then the barriers will not raise. The whole thing is too complicated for general public. Impossible for a single man operation who cannot get back to the boat. Main concern, who will guarantee this bridge will not fail? I do not think there is anyone can guarantee this will not happen. Seem to be missing the main issue, as this development is on an island, and without fail-safe bridge, the development will be isolated, and then a major catastrophe could occur. So this needs some serious thought and some common sense from the panel, not to allow this development. Thank you.
Thank you all. Our comment has been noted by myself and some of the officers. Now, could I ask members of the public if they have any questions? Sorry, many members, any public, sorry. Could I ask members of the panel if they have any question for? Yeah, Trish.
Councillor Smith as well.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back to something that Councillor Carter said, and also something that Councillor Ritchie has said, please, if I may. Councillor Carter, are you saying that you don't trust this bridge and that you think there's a massive safety issue? Because I think that's what I'm hearing from you. If you could answer that.
Thank you. I don't think there's any local councillor present who hasn't been bombarded quite rightly with comments about the bridge malfunctioning. Bear in mind, it's It was supposed to be completed last May, finally completed. If you can call it complete, shall we say now, and be charitable. And that draws you to the conclusion that if this bridge, as my friend Keith Lambert has said, is so unfit for purpose, then you are going to isolate well over 100 people on a new development. And if somebody falls ill, they are on an island, and I wouldn't like that risk on my shoulders, Chair. I really wouldn't, because everyone knows what could happen, and it'll be too late when we all say, told you so, and I don't want to be in that position either. And I would ask you to consider very carefully your duty of care to the proposed new residents on the site and their ability to safely get on and off the site. And of course, the traffic congestion will harm my existing constituents.
Thanks. And Councillor Ritchie, would you expand on some of the points you made, please? Because I don't really, I don't think you had enough time to expand on some of them, and I'd just like to understand those a bit more. I know you were concerned about the green space, and that's something that I've actually got as a point as well. So if you could expand, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smith. So the green space, it meets policy, admittedly, and the extra donation, as it were, contribution is welcome, but we have to do better in Leeds. We've got to make a difference to these local communities who lose out. You know, it used to be called planning gain, didn't it? And we're not really getting anything. I think members will recognise that £25,000 might buy you 2 pieces of equipment if you're lucky on a park. And when you think it's a build to rent scheme, it's basically a cash cow for the developer for the lifetime of its development. So by giving an extra contribution, I feel that it would make, go some way to compensate if this gets approved.
Councillor Esselwood.
Yeah, and my question is to Jerry, just on the surface water and the water which I know comes from the river to the how it feeds Rodley Nature Reserve, and your concerns over that contamination. I know you said that you had additional information, so I just wondered if you could let us know what should happen, or what you think is the best way of happening to prevent that, and that needs to be factored into the plan, certainly.
We have a licensed water intake from the River Aire, which feeds all through the reserve. So it's our only supply of water. It feeds into the lagoons where we have birds, otters, mammals, lots of insects. It feeds through to the dragonfly pond area, which is now accepted as a national hotspot for dragonflies. We've received national recognition for that, and it's one of the most popular parts of the reserve with our education visits. We do a lot of education work. The abstraction point is directly opposite the development site. If water comes out of the development site and goes across the river and is taken up by the abstraction, our abstraction is running all the time. We pump water in, it flows through the reserve, and it flows out at the other end. So we're always pumping water in at various volumes. Theoretically, this is clean surface water, but we all know what gets tipped onto roads. Bits of petrol, oil, diesel leaking from cars. People chuck all sorts of stuff down local drains. Oh, it's just going down the sewage works. Of course, this isn't going to the sewage works. It's going to go straight down into the river. And if there's a local downpour, it'll be flushed out rapidly into the river. There may not be any significant dilution into the river, and it may go straight across into the reserve. you might say that's a low risk. The risk may be low, but the consequences are extremely serious. And so we have to balance those out, and we have to be absolutely sure that there is no chance of water from that surface water outfall going into the reserve and damaging the wildlife, which is a benefit for the whole community that we as a reserve serve. So what we need to do is make sure either there is no discharge, or the discharge is positioned in such a way that it can't discharge across the river directly to our intake, and is directed in such a way that it is bound to flow downstream. So there's the design considerations that if you do give planning permission allowing this, we need an input into it. At the moment, what we're doing is buying a pig in a bag. We don't know what we've got. There's a plan saying it's actually said to be decided. So who's deciding? We need to make sure we have a say in that, or it's stopped.
Councillor Devani.
Thank you, Chair. Jerry, can we carry on a bit talking about the outflow from the development? There has to be one, I presume. Where do you think it should be sited?
It needs to be sited well downstream and directed downstream, so it can't flow across the river. If there's a sudden downfall, it's flushed out, it would go across the river. In many ways, geographically, if you like, the obvious place to put it would be to go straight opposite our intake, because the gradients are the easiest there. But if it went there, there would be risk of damage to the root zones of the trees there. If it goes down further downstream, it will be harder to install, and that would damage some of the trees and potentially damage wildlife in that area. There is actually a canal overflow which is behind the site, the development site. It runs down the edge of it, down the east and southern edge of it, and that's used to take water from the canal into the river when there's too much water in the canal. It's possible that site could be that could be used, but what we need to do is make sure it cannot get into our intake, because the results would be disastrous.
Just before you ask your next question, can Steve just add on to the back of your question?
Sorry, Chair, just for members' benefit, Mike Doherty and I were on site yesterday and met Jerry, and we did go across the site and discuss this particular issue. The reference to buying a pig in the poke is simply that this is actually covered by a condition, so the detail of where that outfall would be considered, and whatever interceptors for any noxious liquids such as oil that may come off cars, etc., will be considered at that particular point. And we did accept, Mike and I, that there would be the opportunity for input, but also we were very clear in our minds that any such outflow would have to be downstream of the location of this extract unit. So we did discuss it yesterday on site.
Thank you for that, Mr. Butler. Councillor Ritchie, you said the 25,000 wouldn't get you a great deal. What would you see as a valid, more realistic amount?
Well, I think I said £50,000 minimum, and I don't think that would affect the developer Cadix in any way in terms of their bottom line significantly. Like I say, it's a build to rent scheme, and it's a cash cow for the lifetime of the tenancies. So let's put a bit back in our communities, please.
Oh, Chair. Sorry, that is. Mr. Lambert, you started by saying what your expertise was. I know I didn't quite catch all of it, and not the actual relevance of it, and one of my colleagues asked me as well. Could you just restate your expertise and how that fits in with this particular bridge?
I can.
Thank you.
When I served my time at Thomas Smith's, which is right opposite that place, Thomas Smith's produced cranes and excavators. All cranes and excavators use slew rings, which the bridge uses. I said it was an archaic design. The design was thrown out at Thomas Smith's in the 1960s. We stopped using that type of thing, except on very, very big dockside cranes. Yeah. So I have a lot of experience. Not only did I design them, and I was a production engineer, so I had to make sure that every part that went into those cranes had to work. I know exactly how they produce them. I've even worked on all the machines to do it, which included gear cutting machines and the rest of it. And I've been I'm a retired engineer. I'm 80 years of age in a couple of weeks. Yeah. So I've been in engineering for 60 odd years. Yeah. After that, I went all over the place in different engineering companies, and I finished up back at Rodley Engineering. Rodley Engineering produced quite a few of the bridges that are on the Leeds and Liverpool Canal. And when I looked at that, the way that bridge had been designed and built and manufactured, it's got no chance of lasting 120 years like people say it's got to do. It's totally inadequate at this moment in time. And no matter what you use, with sticking plaster type remedies, it ain't going to work. And my objection right from word go is if this bridge fails at any time in the future, which it will, right? Even a really good design one could even do that, because any mechanical thing can fail. If it fails when the bridge is open, which it has done numerous times already, yeah, then the emergency services cannot get there. And that's going to be a catastrophe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, couple of things to start with. Councillor Ritchie, you mentioned the car parking layout, and that, you know, if you could expand on what your ideas would be around the car parking layout, and more generally to anyone who wishes to answer the question, what contingency plans have you been involved in locally if these various things fail? If this was to fail, what discussions have you had about contingencies that we put in place? So in other words, if the bridge is locked open, what discussions has there been locally as to what you'd put in an emergency to get access back again? Have there been any discussions? And if not, why not? And then I've also got concerns around the construction management plan in terms of its layout and how it's going to affect where compounds are going to be exactly, and where cars are going to be parked from the people who are building the estate. So Councillor Ritchie on the car parking, and any of the four of you wishing to expand upon any points on the other ones.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. So in terms of parking, in the outline, that was predicated on the capacity of Town Street to take informal parking, as it quotes, from Mossbridge Road. Well, that's clearly nonsense. We know what happens. The family homes, you get a teenager, they get a car, 2 and 3 cars for properties, probably a more likely average. The trouble is with our policy, it's always reactive, isn't it, really? It takes so long, and that's no slight on any of the officers, because it takes so long to go through the public consultations and whatnot. And there's the ambition that people will be cycling and using public transport. Well, public transport in Rodley is an absolute nightmare, and probably likely to get worse if more bus funding isn't given. So we've got to accept people coming cars. You only have to look at the Civic or Council car park on full council day to show that how we all, well, most of us behave. So the bottom line is, and it's also below policy anyway for the flats, albeit slightly below. Now, obviously, people have visitors, christenings you might have at your house, social events, that brings more 2 and 3 cars. And we know I think every estate we've built recently, you can drive by and you'll see cars parked on the pavements on those estates. I think where my mother-in-law lives on West Park, that little development there opposite Midgley's and what have you, up there's always cars parked on there. We sometimes walk the dog across there on the way to see my mother-in-law. And it just shows that it's not working 2 spaces per unit, but that's the policy. However, to make up for the shortfall, if you remove 1 or 2 of those units, you could put in some visitor parking, because visitors to the canal that don't drive, if the cricket club car park's full, which it often is, let me tell you, I regularly watch cricket down there in the summer, they will park on the estate. So you'll have problems on the estate as well. So it's a really serious matter, actually. In terms of, I'll go first on your other question about discussions for emergencies. Yeah, we've had those discussions, and officers refer to no objections from the emergency services, and they cite the fact, which is in the report, that the bridge is open to traffic the vast majority of the time. So that's been the answer on that one.
Yes, Chair, on the issue of emergencies, I've drawn in fairly graphic terms the attention of most senior officers in this council to the problems that will ensue if the emergency services aren't able to access the site. I won't insult your intelligence by reading some of the responses, but let's just underline it and say it leaves me extremely unhappy, because we have a duty of care here to, and almost washing the hands pilot style is not underlined acceptable. We've all seen the problems get worse and worse through this construction period. And I'm not directing this at the planning department. Let me stress, I'm addressing the issues further up the line and to policy. Policy is surely there for guidance to a large extent, and there are sites where there are exceptions because of the obvious difficulties and the logistics of the site. And Kevin Ritchie's outlined some of the difficulties on that site, and that they're absolutely right. But the problems that those will create if you don't address them in this planning committee will be for my residents in Rodley to have to pick up the ticket because there is no parking on Rodley Town Street. And as has been rightly said, all that will happen is that people will park all over, which is why I asked for you to consider residents parking in the streets opposite, although the Highways Department will say, well, they've got drives, but drives aren't much good if somebody's parked so tight up against the access, you can't get your car in or out. And it's infuriating that we don't seem to look at across the piece at developments, because they are all different. And this one highlights some serious issues. And I would ask you to really take it on board, because the buck does stop here, I'm afraid to say.
If I could give you some personal experience of the likely access problems. Over the last year, Yorkshire Water have had an alternative access route across the farmer's field, and we as tenants of Yorkshire Water have been able to use that. In the future, that won't be available to us once the bridge is opened. Recently, we had a problem 2 weeks ago. We had a problem with access when the gates on the bridge wouldn't open. I actually helped a man try and move the bridge round. The whole incident took well over an hour and a quarter before it was open again. We had a queue of 30 cars on the reserve who'd come down to visit the reserve and wanted to go home. There were lots more on the reserve who were still looking around. So what we did, I think maybe we shouldn't have done that, we used the alternative farmers field route. We evacuated them across the farmers field. We had to be careful to make, there were no cattle in the field, so we got them safely across and then closed that route off. Unfortunately, they've got the bridge working again by then. That won't be possible in the future. So people who couldn't reserve, if the bridge breaks down, we won't be able to do that because that's a time-limited access route for Yorkshire Water. Over the last year, we've suffered from the lack of a bridge. The bridge was taken out prematurely and installed very late. It should have been in 2 months. It still isn't properly working after 13 months.
Councillor Anderson, was that one of your questions? Sorry? No, it's okay. I just want to make sure it was.
What I want to find out is the community as a whole are there mitigations to help them?
No, I'm not denying the question.
Yeah.
I just want to know if.
It's answering my question, yes.
If I could just finish off, over the last year, we've had to reduce opening of the reserve to 1 day a week instead of 3 days a week. That's affected the enjoyment of the community of the reserve. It's particularly affected families who need pushchair access. It's a long walk down from the next access point up the canal. It's even worse for disabled people relying on wheelchairs, etc. So it has affected the operation of the community. School visits, we've had problems with school visits. Often we've had 5-year-old kids walking half a mile or 3/4 mile down the canal towpath, sometimes in not particularly good weather, to get down and do their education session. And we provide education resources for the whole of Leeds. We have schools from all over Leeds, Wetherby, Hare Hills, Kippax, and from Bradford, Horsforth, all over. That's affected. And if we have access problems in the future, that's going to affect what we can do for the community in educational terms, as well as enjoyment. Does that answer the question? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I'm a Rodley resident, yeah, and what he just said, I live right by the other canal bridge, yeah, and I've been affected for many, many years, which Councillor Carter has tried his best to improve the parking on that particular area. It's a nightmare in Rodley with parking. It's a nightmare in Rodley with cars queuing to get up to the ring road. We had to solve a rat running problem, yeah, and and I've seen all these children walking along this canal, like you said, in rain and what have you, and all that's had to stop, which is not fair, really, because it's something that everybody should be able to enjoy. And it came up a bit earlier on, the canal boats. It was mentioned about one person operation, which I mentioned in my speech that, that's not possible with this bridge. And it was mentioned that, there's lots of boats that have 2 people on. Lots of the people who are the second person on the boat are actually disabled. So, there's going to be a problem. They have to ring up and get someone from Canal and River Trust to come down, and they had to wait 2 hours the first time that happened. That's if they're anywhere near. And then when that engineer gets there, he might not even know how that bridge works. So the bridge is a major, major problem, and it just seems to have been forgotten. Yeah. Thank you.
As one final question, statistically, is the bridge more likely to be left open or left closed? Which is the most statistical likelihood? In other words, it's locking shut or is it locking open? Which is the more likely scenario?
To answer that, because again, as I said, my office, when I worked at Rodley Engineering, was right by this bridge. That's when it was a working factory. The bridge was normally left so vehicles could get across. So that's the major thing. But in summer months, there are sometimes 3 or 4 boats that come through together, not one. Some of them have got children
The
on.
question
That-
were, sorry,
sorry?
the question were, would it better to close or open?
It's
So
be-
it's a straight
most
answer.
most of the time it's open to vehicle traffic.
Can clarify that, is there a greater propensity for the bridge to be ends up being closed because you just can't open it? Or is there a greater problem if the bridge is open, you won't then be able to close it? Which has got the greater risk attached to it?
Well, I think the boat. I think actually. Oh, sorry. Opening the bridge. Sorry. Opening the bridge could cause a problem because it's a bad design. Getting those wedges out, if it's not lined up. Let's say there's a quite heavy wind. That wind will go against the wedges. Yeah, but when it's open, right, the same applies. When they have to shut it, right, the wedges may not go in. But it's also very, very hard with hand wheels. And like I said, the rack and pinion is very, very poor design. It's not even used the right type of gears, yeah, and it's going to wear prematurely as it is now. So unless it's completely redesigned and redone, then this will carry on. Yeah.
Could I just say the biggest problem we've had recently, apart from the slow rate of opening the bridge, has been when the bridge is closed again after a boat has gone through, it's been impossible for people to align it in the right position. And so although the bridge is there in position for vehicles to go over, the barriers are down. And unless you're going to have people driving through and smashing the barriers, they won't be able to get through. And that's been at least an hour on one occasion. The people I helped last Friday were there for 2 hours and were told an engineer would arrive 2 hours later. So they'd have had 4 hours.
Councillor Hamilton.
My question to you all is, you're not objecting to the houses being built there. You're objecting to the bridge at this moment in time by saying it's not well designed and the problem that you're having at this moment in time. So my question is, are you not objecting to the houses? You just, your concerns is regard the bridge.
Well, go on, Keith, you first.
Yeah. No. I mean, I'm not objecting to the houses at all, right? But the problem is those houses are on an island, and any other island, right, with only one access that couldn't fail is just not worth putting the houses there. So the biggest problem is it's only got one access point. And he said the other one, which people have mentioned as an emergency thing, that's out of the window anyhow. So no, I'm not objecting to the houses, but there are other issues with parking and all the rest of it. But the bridge is the main concern.
The bridge, so I'm hearing from you, the bridge is the main concern, no objection to the houses. There's lots of estate with one way in, one way out. So it's the bridge is the main concern.
Exactly.
Okay.
A slightly different slant on it. I don't support the housing, particularly as it's configured now, for the reasons that have come out in the discussion so far. There isn't enough on-site green space. The drainage issues vis-a-vis the nature reserve have not been properly addressed or resolved. The parking issues that will be generated by these 67 dwellings will be quite horrendous for existing residents. And as has already been said, 10 car parking spaces have been lost on Mossbridge Road. And I strongly suspect that it will be the intention of our highways department to put a yellow line in at the side of Mossbridge Road, so there'll be no parking at all there. Indeed, there probably can't be now. So more and more cars will be parked out on private residential streets and on the highway, and the highway is already constrained. So I don't see how you can say, or certainly I can't, I'm in support of a housing development that has got so many flaws that have yet to be addressed. And Councillor Ritchie mentioned the 106 agreement. Well, a recent experience of how much playground equipment costs. So for 50 grand in Rodley Park, it's probably 2 roundabouts. It's insufficient to say the least. But in any event, that doesn't in any way compensate for the road traffic situation and the lack of parking on site.
Is that to do with the bridge or to do with the housing? But it's all depends to do with both. Because what I'm listening here, the development is a good idea. But from what I'm hearing is the prevention that it is what would take through with it, is the access to the building. But despite that, we are here really to know your opinion and the housing. Councillor Carter and Councillor Ritchie has given it. Councillor Ritchie highlighted the parking issue, Councillor Carter, but exclude the building. What about the housing? Because I do know we are all for prevention. We don't want an accident, as Councillor Anderson says. We don't want emergency vehicle. The bridge do need looking at and will looked at. But today we are here to really let us know what you think of the housing. We do understand the bridge, and I myself are scared of the bridge because I'm just picture emergency going over that bridge, and we're just going round and round with the bridge. So let's talk about the housing.
Then in that case, I have to throw it back, Chair, to this committee. You have heard all the issues that we think that site presents, that housing site. Now, I think we're all asking you to address those issues, and then if we believe, and our residents believe, that we all know we need affordable housing, then we're arguing on a different thing altogether. But at the moment, there are so many imponderables, and so far, what's happened on that site has been such a complete letdown that I suppose there's a lack of trust almost that anybody at Leeds City Council will take a proper grip of this planning application and deliver it in a way that's sustainable for the existing residents and the new residents, and indeed for people visiting, as has been said, from all over the city to the cricket club and particularly to the nature reserve.
If I can answer that question, the nature reserve hasn't objected in principle to housing on that site. We think there are too many units on it. We think the parking provision is not good. But we've made all along had an assumption that a responsible city council wouldn't allow development on a site which didn't have good guaranteed access via a bridge. So I think that answers Councillor Hamilton's question.
And if I may answer the direct question as well. So again, I don't support the current development as it's presented to you in the reserve matters form. As I say, inadequate parking over development. The principle for development was established both in the site allocations plan of 2014/15 and in the outline for up to 69 units. Now, up to is the key couple of words. In the site allocation plan, I recall raising this in my glory days when I were on development plans panel, that it was down for 5 units. Now, I know that's a guide, but that's one heck of a jump from 5 to where we are today in 67. So it needs to be, the numbers need to be reduced and the matters addressed before I can support what's before you today.
Just to endorse that, I similarly served on the development plan panel, and it was the guidance. So we jump from 5 to 67, and it becomes impossible, doesn't it, to say yes or no until we get the thing sorted out.
Thank you. That's been noted. Councillor Campbell, did you raise your hand earlier?
It's all right. Sharon asked the question.
Are there any other questions?
Will she let me speak?
2 seconds.
Will she let me speak?
Chair, thank you. Just before the applicants get the opportunity to speak, I just need to remind members around the table that this goes back to a 2018 application, which was an outline application, which, regardless of whether you think 5 was the adequate number of dwellings on that site that should have been approved, it did approve, as Councillor Ritchie said, the up to 69 potential. What you have in front of you is 67, so it is slightly less. So there is actually an outline that gives that indicative indication that that's acceptable, but also it accepts this development site, whether you like it or not. But the other thing I just need to stress is that subsequent to that application being approved, the 2018 outline application, there were various conditions attached to that, some of which have been discharged by further condition approvals that relate to the bridge. Now, yes, there are difficulties with the bridge. I accept that completely, because Mike and I went out yesterday ourselves to operate the bridge. So we understand it is difficult to operate. But we also did have discussions with some of the people on site that there are contingencies, which I'm sure will be answered by the applicants in terms of trying to correct that difficulty. But actually in front of us, we're talking about the reserve matter applications for the various reserve matters related to the 57 dwellings that we've got in front of us. Not, sorry, 57. 67, sorry, my apologies. So that's really what we ought to be concentrating. I understand and I empathise about the concerns about the bridges, and I have operated barges myself, so I do have a little bit of an idea of how these things operate. And this is why we went out yesterday. So there are difficulties with it, but I just wanted to remind members that we're actually dealing with the 67 dwellings.
I'd just like to point out that we absolutely, I think we absolutely know we're looking at the housing, but we wouldn't be very responsible councillors if we agreed a development where we run the risk of emergency vehicles not being able to access that development in the event of an emergency. So I think what we're asking are very relevant questions, and also we've got the ecology issues as well. That we want. We've declared a climate emergency as a city, and we need to make sure that the nature reserve is protected under that climate emergency. So I don't think anyone's disputing the fact we're here to look at the housing, but we've got emergency access and the climate emergency to look at. You can't just take the housing separately without the other issues.
On that, councillor, but the point being, there have been conditioned discharge applications that are approved that relate to the construction and design of the bridge. Now, I don't profess to be an expert in this, but obviously the applicants have got their own engineers that are trying to correct the difficulties that are actually on the bridge. I just wanted everybody to be absolutely clear as to what we're meant to be considering here. As I said earlier, I did have the opportunity to speak to Jerry and walk across the site yesterday to look at the issues regarding the potential outfall location, which actually is not an outfall location that's been put to us by the applicant. It's the one that Jerry's concerned about at the moment. Mike and I did discuss that he could be involved in the consideration of that. And the clear and obvious thing to do is to make sure it's downstream so it doesn't contaminate water if there should be significant runoff. I just wanted members to appreciate that these things that are being said have not gone past officers. We have considered them in great depth and answered some of these questions previously, yet it's been portrayed that they've not been discussed before. So I wanted to make that point clear, that's all.
Yeah. Yes, could you please leave it, if you can stay for when you're going to question the officers, that would be great, thank you. Thank you for coming today and outline. I do understand, and we do take on board the concern. And my background, I do believe in health and safety, and we do believe we've got a city to think of each angles, and all of those we'll take into consideration. It might sound that we don't want to discuss the bridge, but today we are here to discuss planning. I know it merged, but it's only so much and the bridge I allow to take today. But I'm sure we look at every angle with you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's it. Okay, we've got one in support of the applicant. Could we ask Mark Lane to come to the table, please?
There's actually three of them.
Three.
You might have to work the back entrance.
Thank you for coming. And you've got 8 minutes between you. Is it 2 of you?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be speaking about the planning application today, but to my left is Alan Poyser. He is the employer's representative for Dynamic Capital and Investments Limited. And as I'm sure most of our questions will relate to the bridge, Mr. Poyser here can answer all of those questions. Thank you, Chair. Just to start and go a bit off piste, we heard quite a lot from Councillor Carter et al. About the principle of the development, and just to stress, this site already benefits from an outline planning permission for up to 69 dwellings. So the council have already made a decision that 69 dwellings can be accommodated on this site, and they are satisfied that's acceptable in principle. But to move on, the application currently before members concerns the phase 2 of a residential development of the former Airedale Mill. Members will be aware that the phase 1 works, concerning the replacement of the swing bridge and associated highway works, are being delivered by Dynamic Capital and Investments Limited. These works have already been approved by the council and therefore fall outside the scope of this application. Equally, we are aware that there are ongoing issues relating to the operation of the bridge. Whilst the applicant, Casa by Moda, is not responsible for the delivery of the bridge, we are aware that the contractor is working hard to resolve these issues and expect the bridge to be operating as intended shortly. In this regard, I would like to draw your attention to condition 25 of the outline permission. It requires that the swing bridge shall be complete and operational prior to the first occupation of phase 2 of the development. Please note that the condition relates to the occupation of the dwellings and nothing else. The imposition of this condition will enable officers to ensure that the swing bridge is fully operational prior to the occupation of the dwellings. It is quite right and proper that this condition was imposed, and it provides surety that the bridge works will be properly delivered. However, the application currently before members relates solely to the reserve matters and the details proposed for the phase 2 part of the site, and I would urge members to focus on this. The applicant has worked very closely with your officers over the previous 12 months to deliver a scheme for phase 2. We have also met with Rodley Nature Reserve to better understand the ecological issues and constraints affecting the site, and to ensure that any impact is appropriately mitigated. We have also met local councillors. As a result of these discussions, the proposed layout has been amended to provide an appropriate ecological buffers between the eastern extent of the residential development and the River Aire. None of the existing trees within the buffer will be disturbed, nor will access be permitted to this area other than for maintenance. This buffer will remain clear of development other than the outfall, which we've already touched upon today, which will be agreed with the council. The scheme has further been amended to provide a second buffer area along the western side of the site, adjacent to the Leeds Liverpool Canal. Further mitigation measures are set out in the submitted biodiversity management plan agreed with officers. These include the provision of bat and bird boxes, the creation of hedgehog access, and the recommendations towards enabling long-term management of the site. These measures will ensure that the development of the site will not give rise to harm to the existing biodiversity and ecology. That's on-site and off-site. The applicant has also worked closely with officers to address issues relating to the design of the scheme, boundary treatments, flood risk, drainage, contamination, and vehicle access. All are agreed by your statutory consultees and internal consultees. Your officers have confirmed that the detailed proposals have been successfully addressed the various issues that have been identified. Furthermore, the developer has proposed an enhanced building specification to include the provision of air source heat pumps, improved fabric construction, and electric vehicle charging. Casa by Moda wishes to be a good and responsible partner in the community and hope to foster a strong relationship with local residents and neighbours, including the nature reserve. To this end, they are offering to make a contribution to fund improvements to local play areas. This offer is a goodwill offer and is proposed in addition to the on-site green space agreed at the outline stage. And we welcome Councillor Ritchie's recognition that, strictly speaking, a off-site contribution is not required and all the open space provision is actually provided on site. To conclude, the application has been assessed thoroughly by your officers who have confirmed that the proposal for phase 2 are acceptable. We fully endorse that recommendation and hope that members can grant planning permission here today. Thank you for your time. Chair, Mr. Poyser here is to answer any questions. So if anything's
going to answer questions regarding the bridge.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Wouldn't surprise the panel. I've got a number of questions I want to ask. The first one, there is mention in the papers from the officers about energy efficiency and climate emergency, but I've not seen any details as to what is in here. So can you outline what the energy efficiency measures you've put into your into the properties, and also the climate emergency, both what you have to do as a minimum with our own policies as is, but also what you're volunteering to do to make this an exemplar development by going over and above the minimum that the council are asking you to do on climate change. And can you also address the issue that Councillor Ritchie raised about the car parking layout and how we're going to deal with that, and also how you're going to deal with the layout to deal with other users and conflicts with other users in the area of either parking incidentally or whatever there. And then the final thing is affordables. Have you thought about, or what discussions have you had about turning this into a totally affordable development rather than this, the type of development we've got here today, so that we can meet a need in the area for affordable properties?
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. A long list of questions, and I'll try to go through them, perhaps in reverse order. So the scheme here today is a scheme for build to rent. It does provide a policy compliant level of affordable housing. We haven't considered anything else. My client is a build to rent provider, and he's providing what is required to do to fulfill and satisfy the outline planning permission. In terms of car parking and layout, the layout is a traditional estate layout. There is ample car parking on street. It is policy compliant. It satisfies your officers. And therefore, I am confident that there won't be any parking issues or conflicts. In terms of energy efficiency and climate change, the scheme is policy compliant. The scheme is providing air source heat pumps to all properties. It's enhancing the fabric to make them efficient, and we're providing electric charging points to each dwelling. As I say, we're policy compliant.
Right, but you're not going to go over and above the minimum to make this an exemplar development.
Sorry, councillor, I must have missed the condition in the outline that said it has to be an exemplar scheme. We're policy compliant.
I'm not saying it's been conditioned. I'm asking you to volunteer that this would be an exemplar development. We've got examples throughout the city where developers have chosen to go the extra mile so that they then have an exemplar development that can be held up and people can be attracted from all around the country to come and see what you can do in a site that's got the constraints you've got. In other words, you would acknowledge that there are constraints on this site. And so I would have thought you would want to be associated with having an exemplar development that went over and above the minimum so that people would say, yeah, this company have shown how they can design over and above and make, if you go down into Holbeck, for example, we've got energy efficiency, almost zero carbon, voluntarily. So that's the sort of thing. Have you thought about that or not?
Well, councillor, the scheme, it's certainly in my view, is a high quality scheme of very good standard. It incorporates high quality materials. I think it's well designed, including all its buffers and areas of protection. I think it is an exemplar scheme when you look at the scheme in the round in terms of its provision for ecology and biodiversity. Bearing in mind, we went. Sorry.
Could I just introduce Pippa to chip in here?
Just a reminder to members that as per the recent legal training we did have for all members on planning committee, that as Mark's alluded to, policy compliance is all we can require and is the minimum that can be given. It is always a there are nice to haves and there are always nice to haves in the world as a whole, but all we can require from an application is what is as a minimum.
I mean, yeah, I totally agree with that. But what I haven't seen any explanation in the papers today what the minimum compliance standards are. What are they introducing to meet our basic guidance, our basic standards? I've not seen anything. I just wanted them to explain what the individual. The air source heat pumps, for example, I didn't see anything in writing. I've now been told that, which I acknowledge, and that's a positive. What other things are there? Energy efficiency, water. What are they doing about recycling water? Various other things like that. That's the minimum standards, EN1 and EN2, for example.
Yeah, just to allude to that, it's, as Mark, the agent, was saying, it's a fabric first approach in terms of the proposed elevations on both the apartments and the dwellings. They do indicate the air source heat pumps on the proposed plans. And there is a submitted sustainability statement as part of the application as well, to comply with policies EN1 and EN2.
And also just mention the affordable housing requirement as well, Mark, in terms of policy compliance with that, just so it's clear.
Yeah, just to confirm, I think Councillor Anderson is aware, but yeah, there's 10 units in terms of the affordable housing on there, and they are meeting the 15% requirement. Yeah.
Point is, we are being asked today to look at the application for layout, scale, appearance and landscaping. So how can we reassure ourselves? We're told that it's policy compliant, but what does that actually mean in our everyday language? What is, because you're the specialists, right? You are the experts in these policies. I don't think anybody here would pretend that they know everything inside out about our policies. So it's the detail behind it so that we can be sure that we are getting things. I mean, we keep being told on EN1 and EN2, for example, it'll be all right, we'll get it done when it comes to the final application. Well, we've got no idea whether EN1 and EN2 are finally agreed or not, or whether or not a compromise is reached with yourselves, because often what you plan just now will change by the time you get the satisfaction of the conditions. I'm not asking you to come back and tell us every time you change that, but that's what I'm getting at. I've not got that detail, so I can't make a decision.
Would you leave that?
Yeah, I suppose just to reiterate in terms of that, they've submitted a sustainability statement, which we assess as officers in terms of the fabric first approach. So I suppose in terms of the measures, that it's a fabric first approach to increased insulation, energy saving measures such as the heat pumps, etc., which forms part of the application. And then in terms of implementation on site, that's implemented in addition to building regulations, which is the separate legislation who would enforce the implementation of the energy measures for part L of the building regulations. So that's the mechanism to ensure that those measures are in place. So it wouldn't just be left without monitoring. Basically, they're obviously duty bound by separate legislation as well.
Just to add, Chair, talking about the affordable housing for Councillor Anderson as well, it is there because the 15% equates to 10 dwellings, so that's quite clear, and it would be covered. Obviously, not only is it agreed with the applicant, but it would be covered by condition ultimately anyway. So it is there, and I'd have to just make clear things that are agreed at panel. We don't regularly go away and alter them in backhanded ways without and bringing back to panel, because that would be just fatal, quite frankly. So we wouldn't do that. You know, if there is, for whatever reason, any change in anything that's agreed at panel, it inevitably comes back to panel to be reconsidered.
That's the bottom line.
Councillor Anderson, the questions are allowed to answer, but the question what you're asking the speaker, the officers answer it, and you're assuming things, you're assuming things. You know, so you are agreed, you're allowed to ask questions and answer will make you given. Councillor Anderson, you're allowed to ask questions, answers will make to given if the answer are here to be given, not what you think.
I am lucky that I am on the climate emergency advisory group, and as such, we discuss a lot of things there that we would like to see coming into the city. That's where my knowledge comes from, and all I'm trying to do is at these particular panel, these meetings, we are asked to try and ensure that we can maximize the benefits. That's all I'm trying to do, and unless someone tells me what's happening, instead of, you know, it's policy compliant. Well, I know from personal experience that when it actually comes to fruition, the residents are the ones left with the problems in terms of parking where there isn't, heating issues, wanting to add different things. You then get people hard standing in their back gardens, etc., which all lead to sustainability problems thereafter. So these are the problems that we've got to deal with on a daily basis, and all I'm trying to do is mitigate against them happening down the line, so that the councillors don't get inundated with complaints from the new residents that are coming here complaining, I can't get off. Last time I tried to drive off, I couldn't get past the entrance because there were people parking who were illegally doing it because they were down at the Rodley Reserve. You know, these are the problems, the practical issues that these residents are going to have to face up to, and all I'm trying to do is mitigate against them. But I'll not say anything more because it doesn't seem to be worth any effort.
Councillor Giovanni.
Thanks, Chair. We heard from the Nature Reserve about, and we've heard from the officers about the outflow pipe from the estate. Would you be happy to give a guarantee that that outflow pipe will be downriver of the Nature Reserve's inlet? And for Mr. Poyser, you've heard the comments from Mr. Lambert about the bridge. Could you give your side of it all, please? It may take some time.
I'll start, if I may. Just to go back on one of Mr. Anderson's points, this is a complete 100% build to rent scheme. So Casa by Moda will be effectively the landlord. So if any complaints are raised, you take them to the landlord, and if they're relate to the site itself, they will talk to the tenants. And if it relates to people inappropriately parking associated with the nature reserve, not that I think that's likely to happen because the nature reserve is past the site and they have car parking available. But if that did happen, clearly the landlord would take it out with the nature reserve. So I don't really think that is much of an issue. In terms of the outfall, well, there's a condition that requires the full submission of drainage details to be agreed with the council. I think it's condition 20, I could be wrong, but there is a condition there that requires that. So, the council will be responsible to ensure that that outfall goes down there. And I have no reason to believe that that won't be the outfall that's that they approve. I can see that's completely reasonable. I listened to Mr. Knapp and I thought that was a completely reasonable suggestion. In terms of Mr. Poyser's answers to the bridge question, this could be a little bit longer.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, there's a lot of points raised, and I will try and answer them all. And if I miss anything out, please ask. The first thing I'd like to say is that the contract is still ongoing. There are workmen on site, and the bridge is, at this moment in time, out of balance. There is a kentlage that is applied on the western side of the bridge, and at this present moment in time, it needs additional kentlage. The contractors commissioned and received a 3D model program to identify exactly where the additional weight needs to be. Those steel weights are presently going to be constructed, cut into the appropriate size, galvanized and installed. Once that's in place, the force that is presently being experienced in opening the bridge will be alleviated. They're also putting in handles onto the wheels that you will see on the bridge when you've been, which the original designer has accepted probably weren't good enough. So there is fixing in additional handles to enable the force to turn the bridge much easier. Now, there was talk about the design being inadequate. When I started on this bridge, acting on behalf of Dynamic Capital in 2017, the bridge was to be fully automated. The regulatory authorities involved in this bridge, and they were Yorkshire Water, Canals and River Trust and Leeds City Council, had to agree a collaboration agreement with Dynamic Capital. At that time, a decision was made that the bridge should not be fully automated, because if there was a failure of the electrical components, as has been said by Councillor Carter, you would still be able to close the bridge manually. So we have a bridge that is partially manually operated, but has electrical components to work the wigwags and the road barriers. The designers of the bridge, who are the same as the contractors, it was a design and build contract, were required to prepare an approval in principle document. What this does is it sets out exactly what is going to be designed and to the standards which it has to comply. Those standards are obviously to current day requirements. That approval in principle was sent to the engineers of Yorkshire Water, Canals and River Trust and Leeds City Council and approved. The bridge design also requires what is called a Category 3 check. That is a check by independent structural engineers not involved in the scheme. All those processes have been achieved and gone through. And as I say, those standards that are used are current. And the design has to be to the 120-year design standard, because that is what the standard requires. There is a gearing system on the bridge, which has been designed by a firm called Fairfield Engineering, who are subcontractors to Land and Water Services, the main contractor. I've no particular expertise to be able to say whether that gearing system is correct, but that formed part of the AIP, the approval in principle document, and was approved. What did change after the original design was that the Canals and River Trust requested that the bridge be designed for impact damage. In other words, if a barge or boat came down and collided into the bridge, would the bridge survive? The current bridge does not have, the old bridge does not have that standard. My own opinion was that I felt that was a reasonable standard because if a barge did hit the bridge, it would remain functionable. So it would remain that it could be used and could be opened. The downside of that was that we had to introduce wedges into the abutments to create the bridge being simply supported rather than a cantilever. That introduces an extra operation on the bridge to open the wedges before you can open the bridge. One of the other points raised was that the bridge may fail, and that is quite right, it could fail. But there are, the bridge is being inspected annually for all operating parts. It has a 5-year structural inspection and a 3-year electrical inspection. And all the moving parts of the bridge have been replicated and are stored with the maintenance contractor. So if there is a failure on one of the parts, it can be easily replaced. Furthermore, there is what's called a router, which is presently being prepared to be installed into the control mechanism. What that router will enable the maintenance team to do is operate the bridge from their desk, wherever they are located. So if there is a failure on the bridge, it can be rectified at source, direct from a computer electrically, and the bridge can still be manually closed in the event of emergency to allow emergency vehicles to go through. Those things that I've said about the kentlage, the handles, there are also some more signs to go on for explaining the operation to the boaters and for the router are all part of the contract which still has to be completed. It will be my responsibility to issue the substantial completion certificate to the contractor, which enables the bridge to go on to maintenance, and that completion certificate has not yet been issued. Once the 12-month snagging is finished, the maintenance agreements that were made in the collaboration agreement by all the regulatory authorities will be in place, and that is already has been sorted, and Fairfield Engineering Solutions are already in place to be able to take on that situation. I can't give any guarantees about the design or the installation because it's not outside my remit, but all I can say is that all the requirements that were made by the design and build contractor have been met. If I've missed anything, please ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Trish?
Thank you, Chair. Given that this bridge is absolutely crucial, not only to the residents living on this proposed development, but also to visitors to the reserve and to general public, because it's a very, very well used bridge. We need emergency vehicles over, we need refuse vehicles over, we need delivery vehicles over. It's going to get some hammer. How confident are you that it will maintain its lifespan, that it will work as it's supposed to work? And do you think a 3-year inspection routine is sufficient given the vital use of this bridge?
If I just answer the last question first, the inspection is annual. It's a full inspection annually, it's a full inspection annually of all the moving parts and all the electrical parts within the control mechanism and the control unit, which is greater than what the Canals and River Trust use on their bridges at the moment. I have spoken with the engineers at Canals and River Trust to determine a reasonable level of inspection, and their inspections are as and when really, but generally every 3 years. These inspections are every 12 months. There is a full electrical engineering inspection at 3 years and a full structural inspection every 5 years. Those requirements have been set out in the collaboration agreement and are being met and will be maintained initially by Dynamic Capital and then by Casa Moda when they take over the site. In respect of the life and design of the bridge, it's very difficult for me to comment because I've not been party to that design. All I can say is that it has been designed in accordance with the approval in principle to the current standards. That has been checked by 3 separate regulatory authorities and an independent check. And therefore, as an engineer myself, I would have to accept that that is fully satisfactory, and I would be relatively confident in that it would achieve the relevant 120-year design life and operate accordingly with the appropriate maintenance.
Councillor Esselwood.
There's a couple of things. You did, so when we were talking about the overflow from the surface water, the drainage from the site, you said that was to be agreed with the council, etc. But obviously, Rodley Nature Reserve have asked to be involved in that consultation and has to be involved in what happens with that and where it actually comes out into the river. So I would want not just that to be agreed with the council, but for the Nature Reserve to be involved in that as well, to ensure that it's done correctly and does not contaminate the water which is feeding the Nature Reserve. I think Councillor Smith has covered a lot of my questions about the bridge. I've still got concerns about the bridge, knowing that it was to take 2 months to install, but has been going on for more months than I can actually remember now, and the issues that have been involved with that. There is still the issue, as you've alluded to yourself, of the bridge getting stuck and not being able to close. And then you said, we've got parts, it can be fixed easily, but what happens in the meantime? You've got parts, you've replicated the parts, they're in storage, they can be used to repair. What if that repair takes a day, 2 days, 3 days? How do we get people on and off these sites? So we don't build a house and put one door in, so you've only got one way of access in and out. We put 2 doors in to make sure you've got another exit. So what are we doing to make sure that people are safe? Because I still have a lot of concerns about this, about people accessing and exiting the site safely with a bridge that works all the time. We know it's going to fail now and again. We've talked about that. So how do people exit and access the site in the meantime?
Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the outfall, my client has regularly had discussions with the Nature Reserve, and I'm sure they would be happy to continue those discussions, and I'm sure they would be happy for the Nature Reserve to be fully consulted upon any scheme when it comes in. I'm not entirely sure that it would be legal to put in a condition requiring them to be consulted, but we have, as I said, consulted thoroughly with them in the past and happy to continue consulting with them regardless of whether it can be conditioned or not.
Just answering your first question, councillor, the length of time, and I'm not here to defend the contractor. I have had a lot of, shall we say, heated conversations with them over the length of time and so forth. However, I have mentioned about the change to the design in their defence, shall we say, that was done late in the design period, requested by the Canals and River Trust for designing the bridge for impact. What that meant was that the design had to change and it involved improving the abutments, which required piling to the abutment, which was an operation in addition to what was before because it didn't need piling, and the abutments became greater reinforcement in them to be able to resist the force and create the wedges, and the force then transferred through the abutments. So there was extra operations that weren't envisaged, and of course the bridge became heavier to be able to accommodate that. So there was some, shall we say, excuses, for want of a better word, why it took longer to do the bridge. I don't wish to say that that's all the excuses, because it's not. And as I say, I've had heated discussions with them over the situation. About the bridge getting stuck, I think if we look at this realistically, bridge parts will wear. They will very unlikely to break, as it were, because if you've got an annual inspection, you will be able to see where the wear and tear is in advance of a failure. But one of the reasons why the bridge wasn't automated was to ensure that we could manually close the bridge in the event of some failure. So whilst it may be a lot more awkward to close the bridge, it will be able to be done. The electrical side, with the router in place, would be able to overcome some sort of failure in the electrical components, which is the barriers and the wigwags. But the barriers can also, with some force, be lifted, even if the electrical part has failed. So I think the concern, whilst not diminishing the concern, is very small. I can't say anything else other than that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Yeah, good. Yeah.
But is it possible to say how much the rent will be? Why is it an all rent scheme? Because I'm just really interested in to know why that is happening. And I think there were legitimate concerns about the nature of predation from cats. But a lot of rental schemes actually do not allow to have pets. So is that what's going to be taking place on this application? Thank you. I'd like to hear it.
For the advertisement, when you advertise them.
Thank you for the question. No, thank you for the question, councillor. To answer your questions, I don't know what the rent will be, but there'll be because of the different sizes, there will be variable rents across the scheme. My client, Casa Bermuda, is a purely build to rent provider, so that's the only thing they provide. That's why this is 100% build to rent product. In terms of the potential for pets on the site. As far as I'm aware, my client is not having a no pet scheme. That's why they are proposing a 2.4 metre high fence, and that fence has got a lip on it, so it stops cats climbing up. So initially we did propose, I think, a close border fence with a lip on the top, but we were informed that cats are very good climbers. So it's now a mesh fence with a lip on top to stop cats getting into the nature reserve. So we've taken on board the nature reserve's comments in that respect. Thank you.
Do you say they can have pets? Yeah. Were pets allowed? But that would be very disappointing.
Yes, my understanding, Chair, is pets are allowed.
Okay, that's good. Because I was going to say, if pets not allowed, pets is somebody company, somebody child, you know, so that would be very disappointed. Okay, there are any other question? No? So can I thank you for your comment? And most of all, I'm very happy that you're going to allow pet, very much so.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
That's how the reaction came.
Yeah, can I just come in there? Because
I'm not happy with the reaction.
I was on site last summer, as this is in my ward. I've obviously been asked to be removed from emails since then because of obvious reasons. But I was on site, and it is a real issue. The cats issue is a real issue because you're next to a nature reserve, and it will. And that was raised by Jerry and others. So I know people are laughing about that, but it is a genuine concern by the nature reserve that we have to have that fence to stop the cats getting in. It's a genuine issue.
Totally agree. Okay. Can I, as a member now, ready to ask a question to officers? Councillor Campbell, you've been very quiet.
All right, back to the planning application.
Keep your hands up, let me see.
Can I ask 3 questions? Can you get the picture up of the highway, the junction? That one, right, that'll do. Just for my benefit, and on site we talked about effect elements of that will be adopted, elements won't. Can you just for my benefit tell me exactly where, if all the works are done, the boundary of the adoptable or the adopted part of the highway will be? There's been an issue raised in relation to car parking. Are we saying that it's policy compliant for on-site car parking, i.e. the amount of car parking generated by the development can be accommodated on site? All right. And can you just make it clear in my mind, the outline application in 2018 effectively was the application that agreed the bridge. And so that's actually not part of the discussion we're having this afternoon on this particular application. So that's 3 questions.
Finally. The extension of adoption, as you look at the new, we'll call it the new road along Mossbridge Road. I know it was a road before, but it was never part of the adopted highway. The adopted highway now includes a very thin slither along the I'll call it the north side there, because I don't know where the north point is on there, to allow the curb line and a little bit behind it to go in. And on the other side, it includes a 2 metre wide footway. And then it's adopted from Town Street all the way down to the bridge.
Can you use the pointer to show?
Yeah. How does this work? How does this, that there? Right. So you see the thin slither there?
Yeah.
That's adopted. It's about this wide. I think it's probably tarmacked now. So that fills in the gap between the curb and the existing wall there. And then down this side,
you've got a 2 metre wide footway that comes all the way down to this point here, where it ties into the bridge. So there'll be a bit behind this footway, because it's not a constant width because of the bend in the road there, that curve there. So as it widens out there, that will just be a landscaped area. There'll be a wooden knee rail that goes around the back of there, and that will be on the back of the adopted highway. So it's all the way from there to there, and then from that wall, effectively across to the back of this 2 metre wide footway. On the opposite side of the canal, I mean, they've been dealt with differently. This was land that was adopted by the council some time ago under a Section 228 agreement because it was in private ownership. On this side of the canal, it will be a similar thing. It'll be from the bridge. Then there'll be a Section 38 agreement to adopt the internal roads and footways.
So for my benefit, when we were on site, effectively there's a gate. So the adopted highway associated with the development will go up to approximately where the gate was. The gate you opened to let us through.
No.
Right. Okay.
No, that gate's about there somewhere.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
But it do. I mean, it's difficult because the drawing's a bit faint for an old man to read.
You probably couldn't see it on site because it was a bit congested with all the fencing and everything.
So
if you come off the
it will
bridge-
be adopted effectively. I'm trying to get a picture in my mind. So on this side of the canal, it's adopted all the way up to effectively up to the bridge.
Yes.
And then on the other side, it's adopted up to the
It's
bridge.
from the bridge.
Right.
into
Okay.
the-
So
into
it's
the
up to the
development.
bridge. Yeah. So there
Yeah.
isn't a gap in the
There isn't-
middle
there
that
isn't a
nobody
gap.
owns.
No.
Right. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Right. Your question about car parking. Yes, the development is self-sufficient in terms of car parking. All the houses have 2 parking spaces, which is the expected level for this area. The apartments have 1 space each, plus a couple more for disabled and visitors, I believe, which is slightly lower, not very much. I think we probably need 3 visitor spaces to be fully policy compliant. We've got 1, but it sits within an adopted highway network that's 5.5 meters wide, and the street design guide allows for those sorts of widths to accommodate some visitor parking anyway, as it would in any other residential area, really.
On the street design guide, the
Yeah.
street design guide also has suggestions, I think, for how you might design a road network to prevent parking on the pavement, which was raised by one of the one of the people who spoke to us.
Mm-hmm.
Are there, as far as you know, any plans, or does the plan include elements that will, in effect, stop motorists parking on the pavement?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? That's a problem all over the place. The simple answer is no, because people will park where they're going to park. Whatever. There's no anti-vehicle measures between the carriageway and the pavement to prevent people from parking on the pavement.
Yeah, and I'll just go on your final point, councillor. In terms of the outline consent and the establishment of the principle of the replacement of the bridge, I think that was touched on before as well. In the previously approved outline, the replacement, the principle of the replacement of the bridge was accepted, and that was subject to, I suppose, 2 relevant conditions as 8 and 25. 8 was an implementation strategy about how that would be implemented, so details to be provided, etc., prior to commencement, which they were. I think ultimately, obviously, that the time frame within that condition slipped. That's obviously the issue, which has created quite a lot of content drawing with the reference number. Shall be completed and operational prior to first occupation of phase 2 of the development, which is this outline. So in essence, if that bridge is not fully operational or fully working, I suppose how you define working, they could technically be in breach of that condition. So that does give us some authority over that element of the bridge to control it.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. First thing I'd like to say is that I actually support my colleague, Councillor Anderson, insofar as the report didn't tell us very much about heating types and things like that, or EV charging. So, that was to my mind, it was a very valid point. So I think it was something that we needed to know when we're discussing housing and things. So just a point. My second point is, what are the plans to get the telecoms and utilities across to this island? Bearing in mind that we've just now created a lovely new road that we're going to dig it straight back up. So that was one thing. Another point, given that we have a problem with runoff and where it's going to run off to, have we considered rainwater butts, etc., which would also help with the climate emergency, because every property other than the apartments seem to have a garden. And then the last point is, during the discussions and reading the papers, I've picked up on at least 3 areas where we aren't policy compliant. The house type, which backs onto the canals, isn't policy compliant. The parking arrangements isn't policy compliant, and the on-site green space doesn't appear to be policy compliant. So could you look into those for me, please? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. In terms of, I suppose it may be prudent for the speaker, to the applicant, sorry, to just highlight further bits on the telecoms communication and the services. I think in relation to my knowledge, I think when the bridge was installed, there has been provision for cabling and services when the canal was drained. So when the water was drained out of that section of the canal, I believe the services have been initially connected up to allow the development of phase 2 of the site. So, I mean, not being technically or minded in terms of that, I believe that is in place to serve the development. On the second point, in terms of rainwater butts and rainwater harvesting, again, it's something which could feed into the sustainability statement on the application, and if needs be, we could also condition elements for rainwater harvesting and rainwater butts. There could be a condition imposed if members are minded to include that within the permission. The house types, I think we touched on this on site. It's acknowledged the house types, the townhouse types. We're looking to move away from that type of house, given the context of the area and the topography of the land. There were a number of factors which we considered at the time why those were suppose on balance acceptable with negotiations with design officers. The ones which abut to the canal boundary are obviously the townhouse type dwellings. They've been designed because obviously the topography of the site has a changing level, so the back gardens are higher than the front gardens. So in essence, at the rear of those properties, people can access the back gardens on a level plane, obviously when they're inside those properties. And obviously the parking relates to the design of those dwellings. So it's a consequence of the design of the dwellings, which then feeds into the context of the area. I think if you know the development and context of that area, there are similar character properties and dwellings within the immediate area. So they were designed as such to reflect the character of the area as well. Yeah.
Just very quickly then, Chair, what we're saying is we're not policy compliant because we're not policy compliant.
I should have said about design.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Smith. Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, I think we discussed this on the last plans panel, but I've forgotten what makes it affordable housing. What's the criteria again? I think it's something like it's a percentage of market value, but I just on this specific one, what does it attain to?
Yeah, there's obviously the 15% target for the quantum of houses on the site, but there's lower decile and quartile rents. So in terms of what will happen in terms of the affordable housing, that will be given over to a registered provider and then split between those, dependent on need and the policy requirements for the affordable housing. So there's a 15% requirement, so 10 units have been identified. And then it's like you say, you are correct in terms of the rents. There's a policy compliance requirement for lower decile rents, which is obviously weighed up and split between the 10 dwellings.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No? Comments? Are there any comments to the officer? Comments? Yeah, Conjesh.
Sorry. So I've got a fair few comments, so apologies for this, but in my mind, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. Life's got no guarantees, but given the details that we've heard today and the added stresses to this bridge, it's a fair bet to say that it's going to break. And how regularly or for how long, we don't know. It's an unknown quantity, but we have a duty of care to each of those residents, each of the reserve visitors, and to every member of the public who currently uses that bridge. Added to that, we've got added noise and light contamination or light pollution to the nature reserve, which we haven't discussed, and it will happen. We've got the problems with the flooding and runoff that we need to deal with. We've discussed several areas where we're not policy compliant. And I actually think there is an element of overdevelopment to this as well. So they're my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Councillor Anderson.
Personally, won't be able to support this for a number of reasons. One is this isn't policy compliant. When I was asking my questions earlier on, I was told that this was a policy compliant application. Well, now I've been told it's not. So either, why the two standpoints on it. I haven't seen enough evidence about the energy efficiency and the climate emergency to justify where I'm coming from. Concerns over the green space. And although we're only being asked to look at layout, scale and appearance, I am concerned that the layout will lead to problems in terms of other people potentially using the area and the conflicts that that's going to give. Whether we're meant to be discussing the bridge or not, we cannot ignore the bridge is there. It is probably the most important piece of infrastructure for the development. And if it doesn't work, everything else, like anything else, it's only as good as its weakest link. And if the weakest link is the bridge, the development itself won't work the way it's being designed to do so. And I've also got a number of other concerns about the lack of backup contingencies. It says under the officer recommendation and any other obligations considered necessary and appropriate. Well, I think we should be putting in something about contingencies. What happens? We heard of a potential contingency to get people off if necessary, but would that legally be possible? Is it even, so we need to look into that. And I've also got concerns that the potential construction plan hasn't been thought through and the implications that's going to have on the bridge itself. Because you could end up with, if you've got a lot of vehicles needing to get onto the site, as often happens, you end up with HGVs parking to get onto the site. And if they start sitting on the top of an HGV is on the top of a bridge, whenever it's needed to be opened, albeit opened whether correctly, inappropriately or whatever, we could have big problems in terms of movements. And I'm also concerned, as someone who does worry about the refuse collection service or lack of it, that if the bridge was out, how are these people going to get their bins emptied? And how are they going to be able to get on and off the site if the bridge is held up for even an hour? And if you do get a number of barges coming through in the summer, it could be open, shut, open, shut, open, shut, and you never know what's happening. And the more you use something, the greater the risk of it breaking. Use it once, there's a percentage, use it twice, and there's a greater chance of it breaking because the probability. So I won't be able to support this application.
I think, Chair, we've, with the best will in the world to the residents behind me, who may not like me saying this, we've slightly drifted off the detail of the application that's in front of us. And I appreciate that there have been a number of issues with the bridge as it is at the moment. But that's why I specifically asked the question, is the bridge covered by the previous planning permission? Yeah. And it is. And so I look at this always from, what would the inspector say if we turned down this application because the bridge is unreliable, or we felt the bridge was unreliable? And the inspector would say, well, actually, you've given it permission. No, you can't turn it down. And so there are issues around that one. And I suppose, I suppose I ought to declare an interest because I'm a supporter of the Canal and Rivers Trust and send them money on a regular basis. But I mean, Barry, I'll be interested on Barry's point, which is if you get a stream of barges coming through in the summer, it's going to cause problems for people. Well, quite frankly, I would say if you rent a house at this location, you must expect that when a barge comes through, the bridge will not be available. And okay, we all understand the issue in relation to emergency services, but they don't appear to have raised any concerns. And again, that would be something an inspector would pick up. That said, I think actually, it's unfortunate because we haven't really discussed this, but I think there's actually quite a lot wrong with the applicant, with the detail we're being asked to agree. And this is my opinion. So we've already said there are at least 18 houses on here, on this development, which are not policy compliant. These are these 4-storey, 3-storey with the garage at ground level. And I would remind members that council made a decision a good number of years ago that we would not support houses which effectively had blank facades at ground level because of security issues. And if you've got a long row of those, you've got a long row where nobody is overlooking what's happening at ground level. So if your car's parked outside your garage, because nobody ever puts the car in the garage these days, then you can't see it. And so that was a policy decision made by the council on safeguarding grounds. And I can't actually see any good reason for setting that aside. I think my second point is, I have to say, when you go on site and look at it, it's a really great location. There's a canal down one side, there's river down the other. There's a bit of a wood and then the cricket field on one side, and beyond it, there's another wooded area. And it's almost a perfect location. And yet the design of the layout turns its back on the features that really recommend the site. So it turns its back on the canal because it's everybody's back garden, it turns its back on the river because it's everybody's back garden, and turns its back on that wooded area on the road down to the nature reserve. I cannot understand why we couldn't have designed it, or why it couldn't have been designed in a more sympathetic way to make the most of that location. Effectively, with the best will in the world, I think the developers decided they want to get 67 houses on here. They've got a standard layout, and okay, we've got a bit around the outside for wildlife. But that's not how you should be designing an estate. Not if you want to meet our current policies, if you want to meet our aspirational policies, and quite frankly, if you want to meet the government's aspirational policies about beauty, as Michael Gove keeps talking about. I never thought I'd find myself agreeing with Michael Gove, but I actually do on this one. And that leads me onto the house types themselves. They are pretty bland. Okay, they're stone, but they're all, you know, when you walk around that estate, you don't see anything different. And one of the beauties, and those of us who represent parts of the city with old developments, what we know is that if you've got a terrace of houses, for example, in my part of the world, they were all built at slightly different times by slightly different builders. So they're all slightly different. These aren't, these are all the same. And it strikes me the block is particularly bland and uninspired. And I don't think it meets the criteria and the quality that we should be asking for. And I would just raise the issue, because I usually do it at city plans, in relation to this issue about parking on the pavement. Actually, there are measures within the street design guide which tell you how you can stop people parking on pavements. And it might be a high curb, and it might be a bollard, or it might be something else, or it might even be a tree. But those features are there. And it seems to me that the design quality of this particular development is not high enough for me to support it. I think the bridge issues could probably be overcome, but it might take a while. So again, I can't support this, but for those reasons.
Thank you. Councillor Esselwood.
Yeah, I have some similar concerns to Councillor Campbell. I don't think anybody is disputing the fact that this has outline planning permission, and that's already been agreed. So we know that this has already had that permission granted to build these houses. And so I don't think anyone's objecting to the houses, because we know that's already there. And as you've said, if that went to the inspectorate, then we'll be overruled because we've already agreed that. I think people's concerns are how this development interacts with the surrounding area, because it is a fabulous, when you look at the area, it is amazing. It's it'd be a fabulous place to live with all that, around it. But I think what we're all concerned about is how that development interacts with everything around it, the nature reserve, the curriculum, the bridge, etc., the parking on the main road through Rodley. And then this issue with the bridge of, the bridge malfunctioning, and we've got people stranding on an island. So none of us, I don't think, have, we know that we've already granted outline planning permission. We know that. It's these other issues surrounding it that we wouldn't be very responsible councillors if we didn't look at how that interacts with everything that's going on around that site and that access issue, which does cause problems. So I don't think we can agree it for those reasons. I'm not saying we don't agree altogether, but I think we've got quite a lot of issues that we just need to resolve first. So I don't think any of us are saying we can't build the houses because that's already been agreed. It's everything else surrounding it.
Agreed. Any other comments? But before I ask Steve to sum up, highways, is it allowed for car to park on pavement? Because what consideration are there for partial blind, young people walking on pavement, elderly? If car park on pavement, how are they going to maneuver?
Is parking on pavements illegal? It really depends where you are. In some places, it's illegal. In some places, the actual parking on the pavement itself isn't illegal, but partially blocking the highway can be construed as illegal. So it really comes down to how it's done and where it's done.
I was thinking partial blind, I've got a certain area to be. So the pavement's supposed to be for pedestrian, isn't it? Not cars. Okay. To sum up?
Sure.
Thank you.
Chair, where we stand at the moment, we've had a number of members around the table that have just indicated they can't support the application. However, there is a motion in front of you on the front of the paper, which the only addition to, I think, is about water butts as an additional condition, which could be either added into the existing sustainability one or as an additional one. So I think you do have that in front of you. So I would say at this point, it's whether anybody's prepared to move and second the substantive motion plus the additional condition for the water butts as it stands. And if that's not carried, then obviously I'd come back to ask the members as to where we would go, because the issues that I picked up were about pavement parking, the design and layout to respond to the surroundings, and not happy about the house design. So I think first, Chair, it would be to go to the substantive motion plus that additional condition and see whether it's actually carried.
Okay, before we say something, Councillor Gabani.
Yes, please, Chair. I think there are a potential 3 other conditions around the outlet position from the estate, proposed estate, the fencing off of the ecology buffer before, as Jerry suggested, before development starts, to actually assist the protection of it. And Jerry also mentioned about no Saturday and Sunday working. And there was also mention, I think it was both Councillor Carter, Councillor Ritchie said about potential of temporary traffic orders in the neighbouring streets to protect them from parking for the vehicles of any of the workers on the development. Okay. So I don't know what Steve thinks of those.
To them, there's already we've already discussed, and as I've mentioned right at the outset, that we've talked to the gentleman from the nature reserve about the location of the outlet, and there is already a condition on for a full drainage scheme to be submitted to and agreed, and we've already accepted that we would involve Jeremy in those discussions, particularly regarding the outlet. The simple answer to it all is you've got to make sure that the outlet's downstream. It's not that complicated, so we understand that. So I think that's covered off. There would be protective fencing put up to stop any encroachment into the ecology areas anyway, to damage to the trees and stuff. Whether we could alter the condition to ensure the fencing for the cat predation to go up straight away, is that already on? Sorry, Mike's just telling me that has already been added about exclusion zones for the protection. Might be able to advise me on no Saturday and Sunday working, because I'm not sure that's been discussed.
Not as of yet, but we could, that again, it could be conditioned in terms of we have got 17, which is the hours of construction activity and construction practice management as well, which we could amend in terms of the condition.
Sorry, Councillor Gavani, what was the latter point? Yeah, I don't know whether John wants to respond to that, because this is about protection for the construction workers potentially parking all over the place. Yeah, there is actually a condition on about the compounds being provided within the site to include parking for the heavy vehicles that obviously will need to access it to deliver materials, but I think it also includes car parking. Is that correct for the workers? But I don't know if anybody wants to add anything. So I think that's there as well, Councillor Gill.
I'll just add something on that. You can include within the construction management plan that the developer should provide parking on site for their workers. That's shouldn't be too much of an issue. You can't prevent specific groups of people like that from parking on the highway where anyone else would be allowed to park. It's just wouldn't be legal.
Sorry, I thought that was the case, Councillor Gavani. So do you understand that although there will be provision within the site for the vehicles of the individual employees or contractors, and for the heavy goods vehicles, etc., that will need to do it, but actually we can't actually put a TRO or a temporary TRO to prevent people that ultimately are just car drivers from actually parking on the streets that you refer to.
Apart from putting in a temporary residents only scheme.
You could put down a temporary TRO to prevent people parking, but that would have to apply to everybody. A temporary residence parking scheme, possibly. It would have to meet the criteria for residence parking.
Just because we're at a particular point in this where there seems to be sort of some support for the application ultimately, would it be appropriate that if we investigate that further, because I think we're not 100% sure by that reaction, and actually take it through the chair as to whether we can actually agree. So we'll explore whether we can agree, and if we can, we'll do it, and if we can't, well, obviously we'll to bring it back through the chair.
Thanks, Chair. I think a lot of the issues that's been discussed around the table are conditioned or about to be conditioned, but the one that Colin raised was a good point. I'm sorry I wasn't on the site visit, and you probably know why I couldn't walk around. But the blank walls is not good. Is there any way that we could insist on some windows being put in there or some alteration? You know, Leeds have a history of turning its back on the river. I mean, there was a famous book row, isn't there? The inside out back-to-back city that turns its back on the river. And I wouldn't want to see it continue into the 21st century.
Well, that particular row of properties were done for a reason, because the canal is significantly higher than the site, so there's quite a drop. So it's to take into account the fall in levels. And although I know it was said about it being policy regarding no overlooking at ground floor, there is a row of houses opposite that do a two-story that face onto it, and we thought that in these circumstances, because of the topography, it was an acceptable compromise. Obviously, because of the 69 that had effectively been agreed by the previous outline, that we could accept that, because there is overlooking from the properties at the other side of the street coming in that direction in terms of passive surveillance. In terms of additional windows, if you were to be considering a redesign of the property, then unfortunately we'd end up in a situation where I think I'd have suggested deferral if there were specific areas, because there are windows on those properties, obviously facing onto the canal, although it is the patio doors at ground level and bedroom windows higher up. But then at the other side, I've explained the reasoning behind accepting the ground floor garage with just the access point, which just to take into account the topography and ultimately to help the developer, I suppose, to achieve somewhere near the outlines 69 dwellings. So we ended up with 67. So as I say, if you were really concerned about those properties, I think then that would have to be a defer, because we would have to go back to the applicant. We couldn't do that through a condition because it removes the garages and potentially changes the whole of the site layout.
Just to follow up on that point, I mean, there's only two of us who've raised it, so we need to know that the panel was in favour of that before we progress it, I guess.
There's any further response on that particular point, because as I say, we're at a point where there seems to be potentially general support for the motion, but with some of these additional conditions attached. But that one particular point really perhaps ought to be debated or considered now as to whether you, as a panel, felt that strongly that we had to defer it to further negotiations. But of course, as I say, that would lead to probably significant revisions of the whole layout within the site. And I have to say, whether you like them or not, actually they're not that untypical, because as you walk down that canal path and you get further, and there's a group of locks that look semi-derelict, to be quite frank, you've actually got that exact situation in terms of the backs of the properties onto the canal. Because if you think about it the other way around, it'd be nice to have the fronts facing onto it, but then you're facing on the sort of a main activity to the entrance of those properties onto the canal towpath, which is probably not the right thing. And then you've still got to do something with the ground floor at the bottom with those properties, simply because of the topography. So it's a difficult one. Whichever way you look at that, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So I don't know whether there is support from the panel to actually go back to negotiate that further. And so the question.
Well, I appreciate we've got to try and defend what we've got in front of us. But I think if you remember, I started off by saying, actually, I think the layout's wrong. And if the layout's wrong, then it's possible to change the types of houses and where they are. I'll use this area is really interesting because it's interesting you say if you walk further down the canal, there's some more rubbish. But I've noticed over the years that that corridor by the side of the canal, when I last got on the council in 2004, almost the entire length was employment sites, old factories of one form or another. And over the years, they've been knocked down. And I'm minded by my favourite one, which is Airedale Quay, which is a nice investment, a nice development. And if you look at that, you think to yourself, Airedale Quay, that means there's a landing stage next to the canal. No, there isn't. You can't get near the canal. The houses are built in such a way that there is absolutely no access to the canal whatsoever. And you raised it, didn't you, about we've consistently turned our back on the river and the canal. I thought we'd moved beyond that. I thought we got to the point where we were saying, let's celebrate that element of it. So, I think the layout needs fundamentally altering. It's going to be a housing site. Come on, they're going to be. Let's face it, because we've given permission, there are going to be 60 odd dwellings on it. But we might as well get them right, because this is a very key location, I think.
I understand Councillor Campbell's criticism there, but the comments that he made were actually made in the comment section, which led to him saying that on that basis he couldn't support it. So therefore, I wasn't taking it that was something that was necessarily going to be pursued by the panel in total. Hence my reference to there seemed to be a general direction to support it. So that's why I said that.
If you did want to say something.
Thanks, Chair. We're here again, aren't we? We've got a best city ambition, and we're not pursuing it. And, I think there is enough voices around this table during the comments section to say that we need to have the vote for the substantive motion, see how that goes. And then I think that we will probably be putting an alternative proposal together. And I think that that's the way we need to move, Chair. Thank you.
It was very quick. It was the point that Colin raised and I've spoken on. You did say that it had to be deferred for it, but couldn't we just put it to the applicant to look again? And if it's in line with what people think around the table, we could vote in favour. I think talking about it, we've overcome most of our own objections as we've talked it through.
Not really, Councillor McKenna, because what's been suggested about the house types would lead potentially to a fundamental redesign. And if it's a fundamental redesign, I'm sure you'd want to bring him back here to discuss it to make sure we've got the right thing. But on top of that, in circumstances where you're trying to turn the fronts, particularly with a drop like this, you probably end up with a road along the between the canal towpath and the fronts, because that's obviously how it operates. So I think really we need to see if anybody's prepared to support the substantive motion, and if that should be carried with the additional conditions, fair enough. But if it's not, obviously, then I think it is a deferral, because we need to have we need to understand from yourselves exactly what the issue is with the designs, and then we'd have to defer it to discuss that further with the applicant and try and accommodate your concerns.
Any more questions? Should we vote on the substantive motions? Who are in favour?
Well, we need a proposal in a second.
Oh, sorry. Someone propose for me? Is it proposed on a seconder? Is someone to second? You. All those in favour?
1, 2. Okay, 2 in favour.
Against?
1, 2, 3. Abstentions?
Abstentions?
1, 2, 3, 4. So that motion is not
the substantive motion to approve as it is in the officer recommendation with the additional conditions. So what I'd ask now, Chair,
is obviously for clarity as to what alterations we want officers to discuss with regards the layout and design.
Right, Councillor Campbell.
Well, at this point, we've got two alternatives. Well, we could accept Jim's idea, which is effectively to say, though we probably can't do that now because we voted against it, we defer this for further negotiations with the developer to take into account everything that's been said this afternoon. So I'll ask a legal question. Could we do that?
Could propose a new motion to defer.
So if I propose that we defer this for an appropriate period of time for officers to have further negotiations with the developer around the points that have been raised by all the members this afternoon, that will be a valid proposal.
That's a fresh motion.
Go on then, let's do it.
Sorry, just before we get there though, I do need to be clear what all those issues are.
What are the issues, Councillor Campbell?
Well,
What are the issues?
if you remember, I'm trying to fish us out of a hole here. I'm doing my best. I mean, you know, the developer must have heard everything that's been said. Officers have heard everything that's been said. There've been a whole range of things. A number of the things we've discussed, if I'm brutally honest, are not relevant to this application. And I wouldn't expect you to go away and negotiate on that, for example. But I think from my point of view, and members might wish to chip in, but from my point of view, I think the layout design needs to be looked at. The non-policy compliant housing needs to be looked at. I think a couple of people have raised the issue about the green space contributions. I think we've accepted, haven't we, that in effect the water outlet, that's a given. That's a given. And it seems to me that as part of the layout design, they could look at how they might prevent inappropriate parking, which appears to be an issue. Those are my points. I don't know if anybody's got anything else that I've missed out.
Anything else?
So,
Sorry, Chair. Is there any way, I know that it's already probably been dealt with at the outline, but is there any way to add in some negotiation around the impact on the wider highway? Because obviously that's a massive concern.
No, we've gone past that point, I'm afraid, Councillor Smith. So, hang on a second. I've got layout and the design, which was merely about responding to the canals and the river better. The design being about some of the window layouts, particularly on the 3-stroke 4-story properties. The non-policy compliant house types is about the sizes, basically, isn't it? I think if that's the type. So it comes to the housing mix ultimately, doesn't it? The green space one, I just want to bring Mike on this a little bit, because my understanding, I know sorry, Mike, I'm dropping you in. But I know the request from Councillor Ritchie for £50,000, but my understanding, if I'm not going to be corrected, is that actually the green space is policy compliant, but then we are getting additional monies, which actually we're not really in a position to insist upon, but it's almost a gratuity, for want of a better description. So I think I need to urge caution. If Mike can just support me in that's correct, and then perhaps ask Pippa about whether we should be pursuing that at all, bearing in mind all we are supposed to be achieving is policy compliance. I know the aspirations, but at the end of the day, it creates some probity issues, I think, in my mind, because we've had this discussion before about sites where, an applicant could almost be seen to be buying a permission by offering such sums of money when they're not actually required.
Well, for our benefit, can we get the drawing up so that you can outline to me the public open space on site as opposed to the effectively extension to the nature reserve, which is really what we're talking about by the side of the river, isn't it?
Yeah, just to sort of, I suppose, outline that the green space requirements, we've tried to outline that within the report. I think that's from 71 onwards. And I suppose, as I said in the initial presentation, it was a hybrid approach in that the approved outline consent, the green space quantum was established, which is delivered via this layout through. What's the point of it? It's basically through what we would consider a hybrid approach, which again is outlined within the report, through the areas at the back of the proposed apartment block, and obviously the areas up towards the top of the site. The issue we have with this application, and again through negotiation with the ward members, the Nature Reserve, various other parties, is that ecology in essence took precedent over the green space, hence why there's on-site delivery, but not necessarily a conjoined area of green space, because if that was the case, again, looking at a re-layout, we'd have to be conscious of not eating into any of the ecology buffers, because the ecology buffers were approved as an indicative plan at outline stage as well. So hence why the quantum is compliant, but the applicant has opted to give an additional off-site payment at request of ward members.
Is it related to the, sorry, no, it's Councillor Campbell. Is it related to this?
Yeah, it strikes me though that the space behind the block of flats is in effect the space for the flats, isn't it? It isn't really publicly available. Now I do understand that you can buy out the green space, but I think I'd like to know that we were actually getting something, what we were getting in return, because simply a statement, well, you could spend it on the local park, is probably not very good given the track record that we've got in relation to developers who buy out the green space obligation. So I think the green space obligation is part of that discussion in relation to layout.
Yeah, that's noted.
That green space contribution will be written into the intention is to write it into the 106, so it does go to Rodley Park as was requested by Councillor Ritchie. I'm getting a bit confused now.
No, yeah, that's correct. I mean, the idea of it going to the park was agreed through negotiation with the ward members, so that's why.
Look, I appreciate that it's complicated, but as I say, the on-site green space, which we'd like to maximise, one area that you're telling me makes it policy compliant actually is effectively the majority of the residents couldn't get at it. And therefore it's about saying we need to make the space that's on site both publicly accessible and actually a meaningful space. You know, the grass verge at the entrance, you know, it's green, but it's not really amenity space. It's the bit that they couldn't put a house on. Let's be honest. Okay, but if you're doing that, if you're looking at the layout, which we're asking you to do, then you can look at where the green space is within that layout.
Yeah, no, it's noted. I think that just to sort of revisit the design, the comments on the design, the verge area referred to at the top and the sort of open space, that was agreed in terms of both design and highways to prevent the development going towards the nature reserve.
Look, I understand that. I think, look, we can talk about this all afternoon if you like, but actually, I'm saying, and I think hopefully what members will agree, is that this is an element for that discussion about the layout. You don't have to defend the position that we're in at the moment. What we're really saying is just we need to have a conversation around this, and that's it. And it would seem to me the easiest thing to do is to say, yes, councillor, and off we go.
Yep, noted.
On site this morning, we were told specifically that that site you just identified there was not publicly accessible. We were, you know, when we were in a group discussing it, we were specifically told that was not publicly available. Now, if it is publicly available, then the site visit was wrong. If it is public, you know, so one of the two of them is wrong. Either we were told this morning on site it wasn't publicly available. You're now saying it is. Which is it?
It is publicly accessible, but we had negotiation with policy officers regarding that, because obviously, again, looking at the mixed approach, that those apartment blocks need an area of private amenity space, but that would not specifically be cut off from the wider development. So in essence, you could go into that development and access that area of green space at the back of the amenity block. So in theory, you could get there, but it was unlikely. I think that's what I
Recipe
said.
for residents saying, this is my space, get out.
Trying to bring it to a conclusion, because wrapped up and trying to obviously steer members in the right direction in terms of the probity of all the discussions. I've got, we had the condition regarding the water boats. We would then defer this application for further discussions with the applicant regarding the layout and design and the potential non-policy compliant with the house types. The green space to be more meaningful, but there was a fourth point that started. I haven't written in my notes. I only got as far as putting inappropriate. And I'm not quite sure what it was, which was last issue that was raised by Councillor Campbell.
Is the appropriate part?
Oh, right. Parking on the pavements. So if we can do measures for that as well. Okay.
Can I just ask when it come back that we're not going to be discussing the bridge?
No.
Because obviously the bridge has taken over the other discussion where we should have been looking at the design and etc., whether we were happy with it, the house type, etc. And so that's why it has to be deferred and come back. And I'm saying,
I totally
to
agree with
ensure, no, because I won't come. I will not come if we're going to go on about the bridge again. Yes, we all can foresee accident and things happen in the future, but you know, at this moment in time, I think it's all being explained and it's going to have to go forward, and they're going to have to ensure that it's done right. And obviously, the other everybody else has had the say about the bridge. So when it come back, can we? I'm requesting. If not, I'll be poorly.
Sorry, Councillor Hamilton, without being flippant, I didn't want to discuss the bridge at all today. To me, but yeah, I understand your point completely, and hopefully by the time it comes back to members, the bridge is operating better. So yeah, so I've got. I think we understand, Mike and I, between us about the layout and design, the non-policy compliant with the house types, green space not meaningful, and to look at measures to prevent on-pavement parking. No, it's there. My water boats, my boats. So on that basis, is somebody prepared to? Yeah.
Second. All those in favour? All those in favour of the motion?
Is that unanimous, or is Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, we voted.
Councillor Anderson abstained, and the part. Oh, voted against. Okay.
Right. So. Thank you. Excuse me, the next time and date of meeting is the 16th of March, 1:30. Have a safe journey home.
You're right. 20